Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
I pulled into my parents' driveway expecting to hear Jake's excited chatter about carnival rides and cotton candy. Instead, I found my 8-year-old son sitting alone on the front porch steps, his small frame hunched against the December wind. Tears had dried into crystalline streaks down his reddened cheeks. The other kids were nowhere in sight. Something was terribly wrong. As I approached, Jake looked up with eyes that held a pain no child should ever experience. My parents had taken all 6 grandchildren to the Winterland Festival that afternoon, but they left Jake behind. Their reason still makes my blood run cold. They told him there were only enough tickets for real grandchildren, not kids whose parents were divorced. The passes I unknowingly funded through my rewards credit card. The December air bit through my jacket as I knelt beside Jake on those concrete steps. His lips were nearly blue from the cold, and when he tried to speak, his words came out in shaky whispers between chattering teeth. "Dad, why don't they love me anymore?" Jake asked, pressing his face into my shoulder. "All my cousins got to go inside and I had to watch through the fence." My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Through his broken explanation, I learned the full scope of what had happened. Emma, Brad, Lucy, Sam, Tyler, and Maggie had all received special wristbands that granted access to every ride and attraction. Jake watched them climb aboard the massive Ferris wheel, laughing and pointing at the view, while he stood pressed against the chain-link barrier like some kind of outsider. The front door creaked open, and my mother Sandra emerged, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. Her expression held no remorse, only a defensive irritation that I had arrived earlier than expected. "Before you start lecturing me, Tony, you need to understand something." She began, her voice carrying that familiar tone she used when she believed she was absolutely right. "Jake isn't really part of this family anymore. You and Maria divorced, which means we need to set proper boundaries. The other children have stable homes with married parents." I felt my hands begin to tremble, not from the cold, but from a rage so pure, it threatened to consume me entirely. "You left my son outside in 30-degree weather while his cousins enjoyed a festival. We bought exactly 6 tickets for the 6 legitimate grandchildren." Sandra continued as if explaining basic mathematics to a slow student. "There wasn't room for extras, and frankly, we thought you'd understand the situation by now." That word extras hit me like a physical blow. My own child reduced to an unwanted addition in his grandparents' eyes. Jake pressed closer against my legs, sensing the tension crackling between the adults. The sound of car doors slamming announced the return of the festival group. My father Robert appeared first, followed by my sister Beth and her 3 children, Emma, Brad, and Lucy. My brother Mike's kids, Sam and Tyler, bounded toward the house with sticky fingers and enormous grins. 6-year-old Maggie, my youngest niece, clutched a stuffed unicorn nearly as large as herself. "Uncle Tony," Emma called out cheerfully, "you should have seen the ice sculptures. They had penguins and polar bears and everything." "The hot chocolate was amazing," Brad added, still buzzing with sugar-fueled excitement. "And we got to ride the carousel like 10 times. Each innocent comment felt like another knife twist. These children had no idea their cousin had been deliberately excluded from their magical afternoon. They began describing every detail with the enthusiasm only kids possess, completely oblivious to Jake's growing distress. Robert finally acknowledged my presence with a curt nod. "Tony, didn't expect you this early." "Apparently not," I replied, my voice barely controlled. "Care to explain why my son was left behind?" Robert exchanged a meaningful glance with Sandra, a silent communication that spoke of previous discussions and predetermined decisions. "Sometimes tough choices have to be made, son. Resources are limited, and we can't treat every situation the same way." Every situation. The words came out louder than I intended, causing the children to fall silent and stare. We're talking about your grandson. We're talking about maintaining family stability, Sandra interjected. These other children come from intact homes. They don't bring the same complications. That revelation hit me like a sledgehammer. This wasn't a simple oversight or poor planning. This was a deliberate, calculated decision to exclude Jake based on his parents' marital status. My 8-year-old son was being punished for circumstances completely beyond his control. Beth cleared her throat uncomfortably. Maybe we should discuss this inside where the kids can't hear. No, I said firmly, lifting Jake into my arms. His small body felt so fragile against my chest. I think enough has been said already. As I carried Jake toward my car, he whispered a question that would haunt me for weeks afterward. Did I do something wrong, Dad? Is that why they don't want me around anymore? I buckled him into his booster seat with hands that shook from barely contained fury. You did absolutely nothing wrong, buddy. Not one single thing. During the 20-minute drive home, Jake stared quietly out the window while I processed what had just occurred. My parents hadn't simply made a thoughtless mistake. They had actively chosen to exclude my child from a family gathering using financial limitations as an excuse, while somehow finding money for 6 other tickets. But something else nagged at the edges of my consciousness. Something about resources and tickets that didn't quite add up. How exactly had they afforded this festival excursion anyway? My parents lived on a fixed retirement income that barely covered their basic expenses. By the time I tucked Jake into bed that night, promising him hot pancakes in the morning and a trip to the science museum, a terrible suspicion had begun to form in my mind. Something about credit cards and reward points and authorized users from years past when I thought I was helping my parents navigate modern banking systems. I spent the next hour digging through old financial records, and what I discovered made my stomach turn. Those weren't just any festival tickets. They were purchased using rewards points from a credit card account that bore my name, funded by my monthly payments accessed through authorization. I had granted my parents 3 years earlier during my father's brief hospitalization. I'd unknowingly paid for my own son's exclusion. The next morning arrived gray and bitter, matching my mood perfectly. After making Jake his promised pancakes and watching him eat them with forced enthusiasm, I settled at my kitchen table with every credit card statement from the past 18 months spread before me like evidence in a criminal investigation. What I uncovered made my blood run cold. The pattern emerged slowly at first, then with devastating clarity. Small redemptions that I had never authorized rewards points disappearing in increments that seemed insignificant individually, but represented thousands of dollars collectively. Restaurant gift cards to places I never visited. Movie theater passes for shows I never attended. Gasoline credits at stations across town from my apartment. I called the customer service number printed on my Platinum Rewards card, waiting through 14 minutes of hold music before reaching a representative named Jennifer. I need to review all redemption activity on my account for the past year. I explained, providing my identification numbers and security answers. Jennifer's keyboard clicked rapidly in the background. I show quite a bit of activity, sir. Would you like me to email you a detailed breakdown? Just give me the totals first. Let me see here. I show $4,237 in rewards redeemed since January of last year. Restaurant credits, entertainment venues, travel bookings, retail gift cards. Quite a variety of redemptions. $4,000. My parents had systematically drained my rewards account while treating my son like an unwanted burden. Every point I earned through my monthly expenses, every cashback percentage from my grocery shopping and gas purchases, redirected to fund their entertainment, while they excluded Jake from family activities. Were all these redemptions made online or over the phone? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. The vast majority were online, sir. I show the account being accessed from the same IP address consistently, so it appears to be regular usage from one location. My parents' house. They had been treating my credit card rewards program like their personal entertainment fund, probably for months longer than these statements revealed. Jake wandered into the kitchen wearing his favorite dinosaur pajamas, drawn by the sound of my increasingly agitated phone conversation. His presence reminded me of exactly what was at stake here. After ending the call with Jennifer, I decided to dig deeper. I accessed my online banking portal and began reviewing not just the rewards card, but every account where my parents held any kind of access or authorization. The scope of their financial dependence shocked me completely. 3 years earlier, when Robert suffered a minor heart attack, I had added both parents as authorized users on several accounts to help them manage bills during his recovery. What began as temporary assistance during a medical crisis had evolved into permanent financial support that I barely noticed. They were using my accounts for their monthly streaming services. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, even some premium cable channels I didn't recognize. Their cell phone plan was automatically charged to my credit card. Their weekly grocery delivery service came from my account. Even their twice-monthly housekeeping service was billed to a card I paid. I grabbed a calculator and started adding up the monthly charges. $237 in recurring expenses that I had been unconsciously covering while building rewards points they systematically stole. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from my ex-wife Maria. Jake's face immediately brightened at the sound of his mother's ringtone. "Can I talk to Mommy?" he asked, reaching for the device. I handed him the phone and watched his expression gradually shift from excitement to sadness as he recounted yesterday's events. Even at 8 years old, Jake understood the difference between being accidentally overlooked and being deliberately excluded. When Maria and I spoke privately after Jake returned to his cartoons, her voice carried a fury that matched my own. "They did what she demanded. Tony, this is completely unacceptable. I don't care if they're your parents. Nobody treats my child that way." "I'm handling it," I assured her, though I hadn't yet decided exactly what handling it would involve. "You better handle it fast, because if Jake comes home from your house upset like this again, I'm calling my lawyer." Visitation exists to benefit Jake, not to expose him to people who make him feel worthless. After Maria hung up, I sat staring at the financial evidence scattered across my table. My parents had been living partially off my income while simultaneously treating my son like an inconvenience. The hypocrisy was staggering. Jake appeared beside my chair, tugging gently on my sleeve. "Dad, are you mad at me?" I lifted him onto my lap, careful not to disturb the important papers. "I could never be mad at you, buddy. You're the best kid in the entire world. Then why do Grandma and Grandpa act like they don't want me around?" That question deserved an honest answer, even if Jake couldn't fully understand the adult complexities involved. Sometimes grown-ups make really bad decisions and they forget what's truly important. That doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Will they ever want to spend time with me again? I looked down at my innocent son, his dark hair still messy from sleep, his eyes holding hope, despite yesterday's pain. That depends on whether they're willing to learn how to treat you properly. As Jake returned to his morning cartoons, I made a decision that would change everything. My parents had turned my own financial generosity into a weapon against my child. They had used my resources to exclude him, while enjoying benefits I provided. It was time to show them exactly how much they had taken for granted. I spent the remainder of the morning researching every account, every automatic payment, every service connected to my credit cards that my parents accessed. By noon, I had compiled a comprehensive list of their complete financial dependence on systems I controlled. They were about to learn a very expensive lesson about treating family members with respect. I arrived at my parents' house Monday morning armed with a thick folder containing 18 months of credit card statements highlighted and annotated in red ink. The December sky hung low and threatening promising snow before evening. Sandra answered the door in her bathrobe, clearly surprised by my early arrival. "Tony, what brings you by so early? Your father's still having his coffee." I stepped past her into the familiar living room where I had spent countless childhood hours. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece, and I noticed with fresh pain that recent pictures prominently featured all the grandchildren except Jake. "We need to discuss what happened yesterday," I said, settling the folder on their coffee table with deliberate emphasis. Robert emerged from the kitchen carrying his morning mug, still wearing his reading glasses, and yesterday's newspaper tucked under his arm. His expression immediately grew wary when he spotted my documentation. "If you're here to lecture us about parenting decisions, you can save your breath," he announced, settling into his favorite recliner. "We raised 3 children successfully, and we don't need lessons from someone who couldn't keep his own marriage together." That personal attack hit exactly as intended. But I refused to take the bait. "This isn't about my marriage. It's about how you treat my son." Sandra positioned herself strategically between Robert and myself, her defensive posture suggesting she expected a lengthy argument. "Jake needs to understand his place in this family structure. The other children have stability that he lacks. His place—" I repeated, opening the folder and extracting the highlighted statements. "Let's talk about places in this family structure. Let's discuss exactly who funds the lifestyle that allows you to exclude children from family activities." I spread the credit card statements across their coffee table like playing cards, each one revealing another month of unauthorized expenditures. Sandra's face paled as she recognized the familiar account numbers. "These represent $4,000 in rewards points that you've redeemed without my permission." I continued, pointing to specific charges. "Restaurant meals, movie tickets, streaming services, grocery deliveries. You've been living off my accounts while treating my son like an unwelcome stranger." Robert removed his reading glasses, studying the papers with growing discomfort. "Those were family accounts. You gave us authorization during my medical situation. I gave you temporary access during a health crisis 3 years ago. That was never intended to become permanent financial support, while you exclude my child from family gatherings." Sandra attempted a different approach, her voice taking on the pleading tone she used when she wanted something. "Tony, we were trying to protect Jake from a difficult situation. Large group activities can be overwhelming for children from broken homes." Broken homes. The phrase ignited something dangerous in my chest. "You think Jake comes from a broken home because his parents got divorced?" "Well, don't you?" Robert interjected, his newspaper rustling as he folded it with sharp, angry movements. "You couldn't maintain a stable marriage, and now Jake suffers the consequences. We're simply acknowledging reality." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm despite the deliberate provocations. "The only person making Jake suffer consequences is you, when you exclude him from family activities while using my money to fund them." "Your money?" Sandra laughed bitterly. "You act like we're charity cases, but family helps family. That's what the accounts were always for." "Family helps family," I repeated slowly. "Then explain why Jake isn't considered family enough to attend a festival you purchased with my rewards points." The room fell silent except for the steady ticking of their grandfather clock. Robert and Sandra exchanged another of those meaningful glances, and I realized this conversation was about to reveal much more than financial impropriety. "Since you're determined to make this difficult," Robert said finally, "we might as well address the larger issue. Beth thinks it's time for some honest family discussions." "What larger issue?" Sandra wrung her hands nervously. "Jake brings a complicated energy to family gatherings. The other children have questions about divorce and custody arrangements that we're not equipped to answer. It's easier when he's not present." "Easier for whom?" "For everyone," Robert stated firmly. "Your sister has worked very hard to provide stability for her children. Your brother has built a strong marriage with clear boundaries. Jake's situation creates confusion and inappropriate questions." The pieces suddenly clicked together with horrible clarity. "You've been excluding Jake from other events, haven't you? This wasn't just about the festival." Sandra's guilty expression confirmed my suspicion before she spoke. "There have been a few birthday parties where we thought it would be better if Jake spent time with his mother instead. How many gatherings—" "Tony, you're missing the bigger picture here," Robert interrupted. "We're trying to maintain family harmony and tradition. Sometimes that requires difficult choices." "How many gatherings?" I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The Halloween party at Beth's house," Sandra admitted reluctantly. "Thanksgiving dinner preparation, Lucy's birthday celebration last month, a few smaller get-togethers." Each revelation felt like another punch to my stomach. My family had been systematically erasing my son from their lives, while I remained completely unaware. Jake's recent questions about why his cousins never mentioned him in their school presentations suddenly made perfect sense. We even skipped the family photo session for Christmas cards this year. Sandra continued, apparently believing honesty would somehow improve the situation. The photographer charges by the person, and we needed even numbers for the arrangement. You excluded Jake from the family Christmas photos. We took some lovely pictures with the 6 children. Robert explained, as if discussing a practical business decision. Clean traditional family portraits that we can actually use for holiday cards. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against their hardwood floor. This ends right now. You can't dictate family dynamics, Sandra protested. We've been patient with your situation long enough. Jake needs to understand that actions have consequences, even when they're not his own actions. The only person who's going to learn about consequences is you, I said, gathering my statements back into their folder. Both of you. Robert rose from his recliner, his face flushed with indignation. Are you threatening us? Because if you think you can manipulate this family with financial pressure, you're seriously mistaken. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply clarifying exactly where the financial resources in this family actually originate. Those accounts were always meant for family support, Sandra insisted. You can't suddenly change the rules because you don't like our parenting guidance. Watch me, I said, heading toward their front door. Tony, wait, Robert called after me. Let's not do anything hasty here. We can discuss alternative arrangements for future activities. I paused with my hand on their doorknob, looking back at these people who had raised me, but now seemed like strangers. There's nothing to discuss. You've made your position perfectly clear. Jake isn't welcome in your version of this family. We never said he wasn't welcome, Sandra protested weakly. You said it with every action, every exclusion, every gathering, where he was deliberately uninvited, while his cousins participated in events funded by his father's credit cards. I walked out their front door and didn't look back even when Sandra called my name repeatedly from their porch. By the time I reached my car, I had already decided exactly how this situation would be resolved. My parents were about to discover what financial independence actually meant when it disappeared overnight. I spent the entire weekend planning my response with the methodical precision of a military campaign. Jake visited his mother for their regular weekend custody exchange, which gave me uninterrupted time to research exactly how dependent my parents had become on financial accounts I controlled. The scope of their reliance was even more extensive than I had initially realized. Beyond the credit card rewards and monthly subscription services, I discovered that my parents' checking account had been receiving automatic transfers from my savings account for nearly 2 years. Small amounts, $50 or $75 monthly, supposedly to help with utility bills during economic uncertainty. Those transfers had totaled over $1,500 without my conscious awareness. Their country club membership, which they treated as essential to their social standing in the community, was charged quarterly to my American Express card. Their lawn service, snow removal, and even their weekly housekeeping came from accounts bearing my name. Most shocking of all, I learned that my parents had been using my excellent credit rating to maintain financial services they couldn't qualify for independently. Their premium banking package, which waived fees on checks and provided financial planning consultations, existed only because I served as a guarantor on their account. They weren't just using my money. They had built their entire lifestyle around financial dependencies they had never acknowledged or appreciated. Monday morning, while my parents attended their weekly bridge club at the Cedar Rapids Country Club, I began executing my plan with cold, systematic efficiency. First, I called every subscription service and canceled their automatic renewals. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, HBO Max, Apple Music, their premium newspaper delivery, even their monthly wine club membership. 37 different services that I had been unconsciously funding while they excluded my son from family activities. Second, I contacted my credit card companies and removed my parents as authorized users on every account. The representatives required verbal confirmation of my identity and specific authorization codes. But within 2 hours, Sandra and Robert had lost access to every financial resource I controlled. Third, I redeemed every available rewards point for myself. Gift cards to restaurants. Jake and I enjoyed movie theater passes for upcoming releases. He wanted to see even some early Christmas shopping that I had been postponing. 4 months' worth of accumulated points converted into immediate benefits for my own family. Fourth, I transferred all cashback balances and promotional credits into my personal checking account. Money that my parents had been treating as their supplementary income suddenly vanished from their accessible resources. Finally, I called the Cedar Rapids Country Club and canceled the membership I had been unknowingly subsidizing for 18 months. The cancellation required 30 days written notice, but their access to club facilities ended immediately upon my request. By noon, my parents had lost access to every account service and financial benefit I had been providing. Their comfortable lifestyle built on resources they had never earned or appreciated evaporated in the span of one morning. I felt no guilt whatsoever. Around 12:30, my phone began ringing. Sandra's number appeared on the display, but I let it go to voicemail. Then Robert called. Then my sister Beth. Then an unknown number that was probably the country club calling to confirm membership cancellation. I ignored them all, focusing instead on opening a new savings account specifically for Jake's future college expenses. Every dollar I had been unconsciously spending on my parents' comfort would now benefit my son's education and opportunities. The irony was perfect. Money they had used to fund his exclusion would instead secure his future success. That afternoon, I picked up Jake from school and took him to his favorite burger restaurant using one of the gift cards I had purchased with redeemed rewards points. He ordered a chocolate milkshake and described his day with the innocent enthusiasm that made my protective instincts burn even stronger. "Dad, do you think Grandma and Grandpa will invite me to Christmas this year?" he asked, swirling his straw through thick ice cream. "I don't know, buddy," I answered honestly. "But I promise you'll have the best Christmas ever, no matter what they decide." Jake nodded solemnly, accepting my answer with the resilience children develop when they've been disappointed before. "Can we make cookies together like we did last year?" "Absolutely. We'll make enough cookies to share with all your real friends." That evening, my phone showed 43 missed calls and 17 voicemail messages. I deleted them all without listening. Whatever crisis my parents were experiencing, they had created it through their own choices and actions. Jake and I spent the evening building a complicated spaceship from his construction blocks, designing elaborate adventure scenarios that took us to distant planets where everyone was welcome and nobody got left behind. As I tucked him into bed that night, Jake asked one final question that confirmed I had made the right decision. "Dad, why do some grown-ups think money is more important than being nice to kids?" I smoothed his dark hair away from his forehead, choosing my words carefully. "Some people forget what's really valuable in life, but the most important grown-ups, the ones who truly love you, would never choose money over your happiness." "You mean like you and Mommy?" "Exactly like me and Mommy." Jake drifted off to sleep with a peaceful smile, completely unaware that his father had just dismantled his grandparents' comfortable existence with the same systematic precision they had used to exclude him from family gatherings. Tomorrow would bring consequences I couldn't yet imagine, but tonight my son felt secure in the knowledge that at least one parent would always choose his well-being over financial convenience. The real confrontation was still coming. Tuesday morning arrived with the sharp clarity that follows decisive action. I was drinking my second cup of coffee and reviewing Jake's upcoming school calendar when my phone exploded with incoming calls. The first came from Sandra at 7:45, her voice shaking with panic and barely controlled hysteria. "Tony, something terrible has happened with our accounts." She gasped, speaking so rapidly I could barely understand her words. "Our credit cards were declined at the country club yesterday during bridge lunch right in front of Margaret Henderson and Carol Williams." The humiliation was absolutely devastating. I listened calmly while she described their public embarrassment in excruciating detail. Their regular bridge partners had witnessed Sandra's platinum card being rejected when she attempted to pay for their weekly group meal. The decline had triggered an automatic review of their club membership status, revealing that their account was seriously delinquent. Then Robert tried to use his card for gasoline on the way home. Sandra continued, her voice climbing toward genuine panic. Declined again. We had to call Beth to come rescue us from the gas station like common criminals. That sounds frustrating, I replied neutrally, offering no explanation or assistance. Frustrating. Sandra's voice cracked with disbelief. Tony, this is a disaster. Our entire social circle witnessed our financial embarrassment. Margaret Henderson will spread this story to every person she knows. Our reputation in this community is completely ruined. Robert's voice suddenly replaced Sandra's on the phone, his tone carrying the cold fury I remembered from childhood disciplinary lectures. Cut the innocent act, son, he growled. We know exactly what you've done, and you're going to fix this situation immediately. Cancel whatever vindictive games you're playing and restore our account access before this gets any worse. I haven't played any games, I responded calmly. I simply removed you as authorized users on accounts that belong to me. There's nothing vindictive about managing my own financial resources. Your resources? Robert laughed bitterly. Those were family accounts established for family support. You can't arbitrarily change arrangements that have existed for years. I can change any arrangement involving my money, my credit rating, and my accounts. This is about Jake, isn't it? Sandra had apparently taken the phone back, her voice shifting from panic to accusatory anger. You're punishing us because we made one reasonable decision about a festival attendance. One reasonable decision, I repeated. We've already established that you've been excluding Jake from family gatherings for months while using my financial resources to fund them. That's entirely different, Robert interjected, apparently speaking on a second phone. Family dynamics require careful management. We were protecting the other children from complicated situations. You were protecting yourselves from acknowledging that your grandson exists. The phone line fell silent for several seconds before Sandra spoke again, her tone shifting toward desperate pleading. Tony, please be reasonable here. We can discuss Jake's inclusion in future activities, but this financial retaliation is completely inappropriate. You're damaging relationships that have taken decades to build. I'm clarifying relationships that should never have included financial exploitation. Exploitation. Robert's voice exploded through the speaker. We're your parents. Everything we did was intended to help maintain family stability and tradition. You're acting like some kind of spoiled teenager throwing a tantrum. I'm acting like a father protecting his child from people who treat him badly. Before either parent could respond, I ended the call and immediately blocked their numbers. Whatever consequences they faced from their public humiliation, they had earned through their own choices and behavior. 30 minutes later, my sister Beth called from her real estate office, her voice tight with barely controlled frustration. Tony, what the hell did you do to mom and dad? They're completely falling apart over some credit card situation. I removed them from accounts they had no legal right to access. Legal right? Beth scoffed. They're your parents, not some random strangers. Family doesn't operate on legal technicalities. Family also doesn't exclude children from gatherings while using their father's money to fund them. Oh my God, Beth groaned dramatically. This is about that festival situation, Tony. You're completely overreacting to a simple miscommunication. Miscommunication? Mom explained the whole thing to me. They had limited resources and had to make tough choices about ticket allocation. Jake would have been bored anyway. Those events are really more appropriate for older children. I realized that my parents had somehow convinced Beth their version of events, probably omitting crucial details about their systematic exclusion pattern and financial dependence. Beth, they've been excluding Jake from family gatherings for months while charging everything to my credit cards. Birthday parties, holiday preparations, even Christmas photos. They used my rewards points to buy festival tickets, then told my son he wasn't a real grandchild. You're being dramatic, Beth insisted. though her voice carried less certainty than before. Mom and Dad would never deliberately hurt Jake. They love all their grandchildren equally. When was the last time you saw Jake at a family gathering? Beth paused, apparently reviewing recent events in her memory. Well, he was at... you brought him to... When Beth? Summer barbecue, she said finally, though her voice suggested she wasn't entirely confident about the timing. That was in June. It's December now, 6 months ago. He's been busy with his mother's family activities, Beth offered weakly. He's been excluded from our family activities while I unknowingly paid for them. Tony, even if there have been some oversights destroying Mom and Dad's financial security, isn't the appropriate response. They're elderly people living on fixed incomes. They need family support, not family punishment. They need to learn that family support comes with family responsibilities, including treating all grandchildren with basic respect and inclusion. So you're holding their finances hostage until they meet your demands. I'm simply managing my own money instead of allowing them to spend it while excluding my son. Beth's voice took on the condescending tone she used when she believed someone was being unreasonable. This is going to tear our family apart, Tony. Is your pride really worth destroying decades of family relationships? This isn't about my pride. It's about my son's dignity and emotional well-being. Jake is 8 years old. He'll forget about this festival in a few weeks. But family relationships once damaged might never recover. Some relationships aren't worth maintaining if they require accepting the mistreatment of my child. Beth hung up without saying goodbye, leaving me staring at my silent phone and wondering how my family had become so comfortable with Jake's exclusion that they considered it normal and acceptable. That afternoon, my Uncle Gary called. Then my Aunt Patricia. Then 3 family friends who had apparently heard versions of the story from my parents. Each conversation followed the same basic pattern: accusations of financial manipulation lectures about family loyalty and suggestions that I was overreacting to minor misunderstandings. Not one person asked about Jake's emotional well-being or questioned whether excluding him from family activities might be inappropriate. By evening, I realized that my parents had successfully portrayed themselves as victims of their unreasonable son, while completely avoiding responsibility for their treatment of Jake or their financial dependence on accounts I provided. My phone rang again around 8:30, displaying Beth's number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity about her second attempt made me answer. Tony, I've been thinking about our conversation. She began, her voice much calmer than before. Maybe there have been some miscommunications about family event planning. Miscommunications. I'm wondering if we could arrange a family meeting this weekend to discuss better coordination for future activities. Make sure everyone feels included and welcome. Everyone meaning Jake? Of course, Jake. He's family, and family members should be included in family activities. I appreciated Beth's attempt at reconciliation, but her careful language suggested she still didn't fully grasp the scope of what had been happening. Beth, this isn't about better coordination. Your parents deliberately excluded Jake from multiple family gatherings while using my money to fund them. They told him he wasn't a real grandchild because his parents are divorced. They never would have said that. They said it directly to his face while he stood outside a festival fence watching his cousins enjoy rides he couldn't access. Maybe there was a misunderstanding about the ticket situation. There was no misunderstanding. It was a deliberate choice to exclude my 8-year-old son while spending my reward points on tickets for everyone else. Beth was quiet for a long moment before responding. If that's really what happened, then yes, that was wrong. But cutting off their financial support seems extreme. They cut off my son's emotional support. I simply responded with consequences they can understand. Tony, they could lose their house if they can't maintain their mortgage payments. Is that really what you want? I want them to understand that mistreating my child has real consequences. If they lose their house, maybe they'll remember why the next time they consider excluding Jake from family activities. That's harsh. Being 8 years old and watching your cousins ride carnival rides while being told you're not a real grandchild is harsh. Beth hung up again, but this time her silence suggested contemplation rather than anger. That night, as I checked on Jake before heading to bed myself, I found him sleeping peacefully, with his favorite stuffed elephant tucked securely under his arm. His face held the serene expression of a child who felt safe and loved, completely unaware of the family chaos swirling around his father's protective decisions. Tomorrow would bring more consequences, more phone calls, and probably more attempts to convince me that my son's feelings mattered less than family harmony. But tonight, Jake slept soundly in a home where his worth was never questioned and his inclusion was never conditional on other people's convenience. That was worth every burned bridge and every severed financial connection. The pounding on my front door began at 5:27 in the morning, jolting me from deep sleep with its desperate, relentless rhythm. Jake's bedroom was directly above the entryway, and I could hear him stirring as the hammering continued without pause. I stumbled downstairs in my pajamas and peered through the security peephole, discovering my mother, Sandra, standing on my porch in the gray pre-dawn light. Her face was streaked with tears, her hair disheveled, and she was still wearing what appeared to be yesterday's clothing. Behind her, barely visible in the morning darkness, Robert sat hunched in their old sedan, with the engine running too proud to approach my door, but clearly desperate enough to drive here before sunrise. I opened the door slowly, and Sandra immediately collapsed against the frame, as if my acknowledgement was the only thing that had been holding her upright. Tony, please." She gasped, her voice breaking on every word. "We need to talk. Everything is falling apart, and I don't know what to do anymore." Jake appeared at the top of the stairs in his dinosaur pajamas, his dark hair sticking up at odd angles, and his eyes wide with confusion about the early morning disturbance. "Dad, why is Grandma crying?" "Go back to your room, buddy," I said gently. "I'll bring you some juice in a few minutes and we can make pancakes together." Jake nodded obediently and disappeared back down the hallway, though I suspected he was listening from just around the corner. Sandra stepped into my living room without invitation, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to physically hold herself together. In the harsh overhead lighting, she looked older and more fragile than I had ever seen her. "We got an eviction notice." She whispered the words barely audible. 30 days to pay 3 months of mortgage or lose the house. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Despite my anger over Jake's treatment, I hadn't intended to render my parents homeless. My goal had been to establish consequences, not destroy their fundamental security. "I don't understand," I said, settling onto my couch while Sandra remained standing near my front window. "You receive Social Security and Dad's pension. That should cover basic housing costs." Sandra's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Should cover basic costs? Tony, we haven't been able to cover basic costs for over 2 years. Your automatic transfers were the only thing keeping us current on the mortgage payments. Automatic transfer, $50 here, $75 there, sometimes more when utility bills were higher than expected. You probably never even noticed the amounts leaving your account, but they made the difference between staying current and falling behind." I remembered setting up those transfers during Robert's health scare, intending them as temporary assistance until they recovered their financial footing. Apparently, they had never recovered, instead becoming quietly dependent on supplements I provided without conscious awareness. "We tried to manage independently." Sandra continued, her voice growing smaller and more desperate. "But inflation hit our fixed income so hard, and property taxes increased, and the heating costs last winter were astronomical. Every month became a choice between grocery money and mortgage payments. Why didn't you tell me about the financial difficulties?" Pride. She admitted, finally settling into my recliner with the exhausted collapse of someone who had reached the absolute end of their resources. "Your father refused to admit we needed help, and I thought the automatic transfers were enough to bridge the gap until things improved. Things didn't improve. Things got worse, much worse. And now, without those transfers and without the credit card access for emergency expenses, we're completely underwater." Sandra began crying again, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from some place beyond mere financial stress. This was the breakdown of someone whose entire sense of security and independence had been stripped away in the span of a few days. We lost our country club membership, she continued through her tears. 43 years of membership canceled because the quarterly fees were charged to your card. All our friends, our social connections, our entire community identity gone overnight. Because you excluded my son from family activities. Because we made terrible decisions based on pride and stubbornness and some misguided idea about family structure that doesn't even make sense anymore. I studied my mother's broken expression, searching for signs of manipulation or strategic emotional appeal. What I saw instead was genuine devastation and the kind of desperate honesty that only emerges when people have lost everything they thought they could count on. Robert had to apply for a job yesterday, Sandra whispered, as if admitting to some shameful family secret. 72 years old, and he's filling out applications at hardware stores and grocery chains because we can't survive on retirement income alone. What about your savings? What savings, Tony? We've been living month to month for longer than you know. Every emergency, every unexpected expense, every minor crisis depleted whatever reserves we thought we had. The credit card access and automatic transfers weren't luxuries. They were life preservers. The scope of their financial vulnerability was staggering and completely contrary to the comfortable lifestyle they had projected. Apparently, my parents had been barely surviving, while maintaining appearances using my resources to bridge the gap between their income and their expenses. I got a job too. Sandra added, her voice carrying a mixture of humiliation and desperate determination. Part-time at the grocery store where we've shopped for 20 years. Stocking shelves and cleaning shopping carts for $9 an hour, working alongside people young enough to be my grandchildren. The image of my 70-year-old mother in a grocery store uniform performing manual labor to pay bills created an unexpected knot of guilt in my chest. This wasn't what I had intended when I removed their access to my accounts. We understand now, Sandra continued, looking directly into my eyes for the first time since arriving. Jake is family, real family, the most important family. We were wrong to exclude him from anything wrong, to use financial excuses, wrong to prioritize other children over your son. Understanding and changing are different things. We'll change everything, Sandra promised, her voice gaining strength and conviction. Jake will be included in every family gathering, every holiday celebration, every birthday party, and special occasion. We'll publicly apologize to him and to you for our terrible judgment. Public apologies don't rebuild trust. Then we'll rebuild trust through actions. Consistent, reliable, loving actions that prove Jake matters more than our pride or our outdated ideas about divorce and family structure. I heard Jake's bedroom door creak open upstairs, followed by his light footsteps padding toward the staircase. He appeared in the living room entryway, drawn by the sound of extended adult conversation and probably curious about why his grandmother was crying in our house before breakfast. Sandra's entire demeanor shifted when she spotted Jake. Her tear-streaked face immediately brightened with genuine warmth, and she extended her arms toward him with the kind of welcoming gesture I hadn't seen her offer him in months. Jake, sweetheart," she called softly. "Can Grandma have a hug? I've missed you so much." Jake looked uncertainly between Sandra and me, clearly confused by the dramatic change in his grandmother's behavior. Yesterday, she had excluded him from family activities. This morning, she was requesting physical affection with tears streaming down her face. "It's okay, buddy," I assured him. "Grandma wants to talk to you about some important things." Jake approached cautiously, and Sandra immediately enveloped him in the kind of fierce, protective embrace she had always reserved for his cousins. For the first time in months, my son received the unconditional grandparental affection he had always deserved. "I made some very bad mistakes," Sandra whispered into Jake's hair. "I hurt your feelings, and I'm deeply sorry for that. Will you give me a chance to be a better grandma?" Jake nodded against her shoulder, though I could see the wariness in his expression. 8-year-olds forgive easily, but they also remember pain clearly. Does this mean I can come to family parties now? He asked, pulling back to study Sandra's face. It means you'll be invited to every family gathering for the rest of your life. Sandra promised, her voice thick with emotion. And if anyone ever suggests excluding you from anything, I'll remind them that real families include everyone, especially special grandsons who deserve better treatment than they've received. As I watched this emotional reconciliation unfold in my living room, I realized that my financial retaliation had accomplished more than simple revenge. It had forced my parents to confront the real consequences of their choices and acknowledge the fundamental wrongness of their exclusionary behavior. But reconciliation and restored financial access were entirely different considerations. Sandra seemed to understand my hesitation without any verbal communication. I know we need to earn back your trust, she said, still holding Jake but addressing her words to me. We need to prove that our promises aren't just desperate words spoken during a financial crisis. How do you propose to do that? Give us a chance to work our way back into your good graces. We'll take the jobs we applied for, we'll manage our finances independently, and we'll demonstrate through consistent actions that Jake matters more than our comfort or pride. And if you fail, then we'll deserve whatever consequences you decide are appropriate. But please, Tony, give us one opportunity to show you that we can learn from our mistakes and be the grandparents Jake deserves. I looked down at my son, still wrapped in Sandra's arms, but watching my face for cues about how to respond to this unexpected turn of events. His happiness and emotional security were the only factors that truly mattered in this decision. Jake, how would you feel about giving Grandma and Grandpa another chance to include you in family activities? Jake considered the question with the careful deliberation of someone who had experienced both inclusion and exclusion. Will they really keep their promises this time? He asked, his young voice carrying more wisdom than any 8-year-old should possess. I don't know, I answered honestly. But if they don't, they won't get any more chances. Jake nodded solemnly, apparently satisfied with that arrangement. Sandra released him and turned back to me with desperate hope written across her features. What would it take for you to consider restoring some of the financial arrangements, not everything, just enough basic support to avoid losing our home while we rebuild our independence? I studied my mother's tear-streaked face, searching for signs of manipulation or strategic emotional appeals. What I found instead was genuine remorse and the kind of desperate honesty that only emerges when pride becomes a luxury people can no longer afford. But trust once broken required concrete proof of change before it could be rebuilt. I'll consider it, I said finally, under specific conditions that are non-negotiable and permanently binding. 6 months later, I stood in my parents' backyard watching Jake blow out the candles on his 9th birthday cake, surrounded by every single one of his cousins and extended family members. The celebration was everything a child's birthday party should be: noisy, chaotic, filled with laughter, and completely inclusive. Sandra emerged from the kitchen, carrying a second chocolate cake shaped like Jake's favorite dinosaur, her face glowing with the kind of genuine joy that comes from making a child feel truly special. She was still wearing her grocery store uniform from her morning shift, but her exhaustion was completely overshadowed by her determination to create perfect memories for her grandson. "Make another wish, birthday boy," she called out, setting the dinosaur cake directly in front of Jake. "This one's just for you." Jake grinned widely, revealing the gap where he had recently lost his first tooth, and blew out 9 candles while his cousins cheered enthusiastically around him. For the first time in over a year, my son was the center of positive family attention, celebrated and included without reservation or qualification. Robert approached from the garage where he had been assembling Jake's new bicycle, his clothes dusty and his hands stained with grease, but his expression radiating the satisfaction of someone who had personally ensured his grandson's happiness. "Ready to test ride your new wheels, Jake?" he asked, wiping his palms on an old towel. "I've got the training wheels adjusted perfectly for your height. Can my cousins ride their bikes too?" Jake asked, always thinking about group inclusion now that he understood what exclusion felt like. Of course they can, Robert assured him. This is your party, which means everyone gets to participate in whatever makes you happy. The transformation in my parents had been gradual but unmistakable. Sandra now worked 25 hours per week at Miller's Grocery, where she had quickly become a favorite among customers who appreciated her genuine warmth and helpful attitude. Her supervisor had already mentioned potential promotion opportunities, something that filled Sandra with pride she had never found in bridge club membership or country club social status. Robert had surprised everyone by thriving in his position at Henderson's Hardware, where his decades of home maintenance experience made him invaluable to customers seeking practical advice. His part-time schedule allowed him to maintain some retirement leisure, while contributing meaningfully to household expenses. Most importantly, they had both embraced the family therapy sessions I had required as a condition of restored financial support. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, a specialist in family dynamics and generational conflict, had helped my parents understand how their exclusionary behavior had damaged not just Jake, but the entire family structure they claimed to value. Exclusion creates trauma that extends far beyond the immediate victim, Dr. Morgan had explained during one of our joint sessions. When children witness arbitrary exclusion of their peers, they develop anxiety about their own security within family relationships. That revelation had particularly impacted my sister Beth, who realized that her own children had been quietly worried about whether they might someday face similar exclusion if their family circumstances changed. The financial arrangements I had established were strict but fair. I restored partial support for my parents' basic needs, mortgage assistance, and emergency medical expenses, but maintained complete control over discretionary spending and entertainment expenses. They earned privileges through demonstrated consistency in treating Jake with the same love and inclusion they showed his cousins. Every family gathering now included Jake by default, with explicit invitations and advanced planning to ensure his participation. My parents had publicly apologized to Jake in front of the entire extended family, acknowledging their mistakes and promising unconditional inclusion going forward. The Christmas card photos from last December featured all 7 grandchildren in matching sweaters, with Jake positioned prominently in the center of the front row. Sandra had ordered 50 extra copies specifically to share with neighbors and distant relatives, ensuring everyone knew that Jake was an integral part of the family portrait. But the most significant change wasn't financial or logistical. It was emotional. My parents had discovered that including Jake enriched their lives far more than excluding him ever had. His curious questions, creative imagination, and generous spirit brought energy and joy to family gatherings that they hadn't realized they were missing. You know what Sandra had told me just last week? Jake asks the best questions during family dinners. He notices things the other kids miss, and he always wants to help with cooking and setup. I can't believe we ever thought family events were better without him. As the birthday party continued around us, I found myself in conversation with Amy Peterson, Jake's 3rd grade teacher, whom I had been dating for 3 months. She had volunteered to help with party coordination, and her natural ease with children made her an immediate hit with all the cousins. "He's really blossomed this year," Amy observed, watching Jake organize an elaborate game of freeze dance for his cousins. "His confidence and social skills have improved dramatically since the beginning of the school year. He feels secure in his family relationships now," I explained. When kids know they're unconditionally loved and included, they develop the confidence to be leaders rather than followers. It shows in everything he does: his academic performance, his friendships, even his artistic expression in class. Children thrive when they feel emotionally safe. Amy had never met my parents during their exclusionary period, but she had heard enough of Jake's stories to understand the transformation that had occurred. Her perspective as an educator helped me recognize how profoundly the experience had impacted Jake's development and self-worth. "Dad," Jake called from across the yard where he was attempting to teach his youngest cousin Maggie how to ride a scooter. "Can Amy help us set up the obstacle course? She's really good at making things fun for little kids." I smiled, watching Amy immediately join the group and begin organizing an elaborate backyard adventure course using lawn furniture and garden decorations. Jake beamed with pride at her participation, clearly thrilled that his father's girlfriend genuinely enjoyed spending time with his family. The afternoon continued with perfect childhood chaos, water balloon fights, treasure hunts, and an impromptu talent show where Jake performed a magic trick he had been practicing for weeks. Every moment reinforced the fundamental truth that family gatherings were infinitely better when every family member felt valued and included. As the party wound down and extended family began departing with Sugar Crash children in tow, Sandra approached me with an expression of quiet determination. "Tony, I need to tell you something important." She began, her voice carrying the serious tone she used for significant announcements. "Your father and I have updated our will to include specific provisions for Jake's education and inheritance. We wanted you to know that his future is protected equally with all his cousins." "You didn't need to do that." "Yes, we did. We needed to demonstrate through legal documentation that Jake's place in this family is permanent and unconditional. No future disagreement or misunderstanding can ever threaten his security again." The gesture meant more than money or legal documents. It represented a fundamental shift in how my parents viewed Jake's position within the family structure, from conditional acceptance to permanent belonging. Robert joined our conversation, his arm draped proudly around Jake's shoulders. "This young man helped me understand something important today," he announced. "He noticed that Maggie was feeling left out of some of the bigger kids' games, so he created special activities just for her. That's real leadership, the kind that includes, rather than excludes." Jake looked up at his grandfather with obvious adoration, their relationship now built on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than tolerance and obligation. "Grandpa taught me that good leaders make sure everyone feels welcome." Jake explained, unconsciously echoing the lessons my parents had learned through months of therapy and self-reflection. As Amy and I helped clean up the party debris while Jake played quietly with his new toys, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The Winter Festival incident that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning, forcing painful but necessary conversations that ultimately strengthened our family bonds. "You made the right choice," Amy said softly, stacking paper plates while watching Jake demonstrate his new magic tricks for Sandra. "Standing up for Jake sent a message to everyone in your family about what kind of treatment is acceptable. I'm just glad they were willing to learn, rather than dig in and refuse to change. Some people are capable of growth when they're forced to confront the consequences of their actions. Your parents were fortunate that you cared enough about their relationship with Jake to give them an opportunity to earn back trust." That evening, after Jake had fallen asleep surrounded by birthday presents, and with chocolate frosting still smudged on his cheek, I sat in my living room, processing the profound changes that had occurred since that terrible December day when I found him crying on my parents' porch. The financial retaliation had been necessary and effective, but the real victory was emotional. Jake now knew with absolute certainty that his father would protect him from mistreatment regardless of who was delivering it. He had learned that his worth wasn't conditional on other people's approval or circumstances beyond his control. My parents had learned that love requires consistent action, not just occasional gesture. They had discovered that including Jake in family activities didn't diminish their relationships with his cousins, but actually enriched the entire family dynamic. Most importantly, I had learned that sometimes protecting your children requires difficult choices that temporarily damage other relationships. The short-term consequences of my financial decisions had been painful for everyone involved, but the long-term benefits for Jake's emotional development and family security were immeasurable. 3 weeks later, Jake received an invitation to his cousin Emma's 10th birthday party, hand-delivered by Sandra, with explicit instructions about pickup times, gift suggestions, and dietary accommodations. The invitation was decorated with dinosaur stickers, specifically chosen because Sandra remembered Jake's favorite theme. "Grandma says this party is going to have a pool and everything," Jake reported excitedly, carefully, placing the invitation on our refrigerator next to his recent test papers and art projects. And she asked if I want to help plan the games because I'm good at making sure everyone gets included. Watching my son's face light up with the confidence of someone who knew he belonged, I realized that the most valuable lesson from our entire experience wasn't about financial boundaries or family therapy or even consequences for bad behavior. The real lesson was about the transformative power of unconditional love and the responsibility every parent has to ensure their children grow up knowing they are valued, worthy, and irreplaceable members of their family community. Sometimes that requires fighting battles you never wanted to fight, setting boundaries you never wanted to set, and making difficult decisions that temporarily strain relationships you care about. But when you see your child sleeping peacefully with a smile on their face, knowing they are loved and protected and valued exactly as they are, you realize that every difficult choice was worth making. Family isn't defined by blood relationships or legal obligations. Family is defined by consistent love, unwavering support, and the willingness to stand up for each other when protection is needed. Jake learned that lesson at 9 years old, and it will serve him well for the rest of his life. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect someone you love, even when it caused temporary conflict with other family members? Sometimes standing up for what's right requires courage that feels impossible in the moment, but the long-term results prove that love is always worth fighting for. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need encouragement to stand up for their children, subscribe for more stories about family resilience and personal growth, and leave a comment about a time when you had to choose between family harmony and doing what was right. Thank you for listening to Jake's journey, and remember that every child deserves to feel valued and included exactly as they are. May your own family relationships be built on unconditional love and unwavering support.